Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, so I moved to South Korea in 2006 to work as a freelance journalist, and I was there living there full time until about 2 years ago, and now I've kind of been keeping one foot back in the U.S., one foot in Korea, but I'm kind of done working in Korea. I'm not covering the Korea beat anymore. Korea has a robust media landscape. There are conservative, there are media platforms that are more conservative. Some of the more legacy media tend to have a conservative bend. There are liberal newspapers, only a handful, but generally press freedom is good in Korea, but there have been journalists who have been sued for libel. I think that's a real problem in South Korea, is that there are very strong libel laws. So a politician or anyone who doesn't like the reporting of a journalist could, in theory, go after them for libel, which is, I think, a real constraint on press freedom. And there's also in Korea way too much of reliance on unnamed sources, especially in the government. So it kind of gives this veneer that, is this really accurate? Is this journalist really getting someone like an authentic interview there? But generally, journalism in Korea is pretty robust. In 2002, when I was an undergraduate, I did a semester in South Korea. I was my university's first student of non-Korean heritage to study in Korea. Like South Korea in 2002, it was not South Korea of 2023. There was a very limited K-pop and all these things did not have the kind of impact outside of Korea that it does now, and especially in the U.S. Like most Americans knew nothing about Korea except for the Korean War from the 1950s. And while I was a student there, I produced like a short documentary film for like my university's television news magazine program. So I really took an interest in South Korean politics and the history with the U.S., and I was really fascinated with the black hole that is North Korea. And I think a lot of Western journalists at that time who were coming to Korea did so because they wanted to get as close as possible to North Korea. So, after I ended up doing my master's degree at a university in Belgium, wrote a lot about Korea for my research, as well as just Northeast Asia in general. And then in 2006, I just bought a one-way ticket to Korea and packed a microphone and some other gear. And fortunately, for better or worse, I landed a few days before North Korea tested its first nuclear weapon at the end of September 2006. So I kind of hit the ground running and was able to start doing reporting about the reactions from South Korea. And South Korea kept me very satisfied. But it just, after 15 years or so of reporting on Korea, I needed a new challenge. I needed a new through line. I needed to do reporting that wasn't contingent on Korea. So I looked back at other stories I did throughout my career, and I felt that the stories about disability were the ones that kind of I felt most connected to or the most proud of. And so, I think it's been kind of a 5 or 6 year shift that I have refocused onto disability journalism. Sure. Well, I was just there. With that said, I missed the really bad times. I was there this past May and June. So I think some of the real political upheaval has generally been resolved. I mean, I think they're still waiting on elections, but I felt people were on edge there. Everyone I talked to talked about how, restaurant prices are at least twice as high now than they were, a year and change ago. Certainly a lot of uncertainty. I generally just felt it very difficult to actually make appointments with people in Sri Lanka. Everyone just seemed, it's very on edge, and everyone and torn in many different ways, and just a lot of economic uncertainty. So yeah, it's a, Sri Lanka in general is a nation, I think, with unresolved trauma because of their 30-year-long civil war. I'm not an expert on that period of history, but it seems for a lot of people in the country, still many unresolved issues about disappeared people and the way the Sinhalese military kind of came into some of the northern provinces. So yeah, there's just kind of one situation after another in Sri Lanka, and I just felt, it's kind of it's a beautiful country, very nice people, great food, but a little tense. During a crisis. Sure, I'll just kind of go chronologically. So let's think about before a disaster. Are warning systems accessible? Like we mentioned, sign language, for instance. Are warnings being offered in alternative formats, like news briefings on TV? Is there a sign language interpreter or maybe live captioning? So is information ahead of a disaster accessible? Is the evacuation itself accessible? Are people with a disability prioritized? I met a blind man in Bangladesh in the Chattogram area whose family left him behind as they ran out of their home during a cyclone emergency. They forgot about that. They left him in another room and he seemed still pretty angry about it and didn't really know how to reconcile that. But he was only able to, get one of his daughters to come back and bring him to the shelter after he hollered out to a neighbor who then found his daughter and, oh, sorry, Dad, and, he almost died. And I don't know, he could have died if the situation got worse. As I talked to environmental observers in Bangladesh, they said, oh yeah, when we go to do a field visit after a cyclone, the people we see who died were elderly people and disabled people. They don't have the same means, So is there transportation to a shelter ahead of something like a cyclone, which can typically be predicted, days in advance? Sheltering. Is the infrastructure accessible, like ramps and bathrooms? But also, is there things like extra batteries for people who might need a hearing aid? Or are there, replacement devices? If I met many people whose wheelchairs were destroyed during cyclones, and it took months for them to get a replacement device. Can they store their assistive device in the shelter? And often not, because the shelters are schools or other spaces that might not have the room. So, is there a plan for the recovery? Will they be able to have some quicker access to getting a replacement device? Because, one woman I met in Puri, she lost her wheelchair during the Cyclone Fani in 2019. She said for 3 months she couldn't work. And she was already in an economic precarious situation. She'd make chicken in her very modest kitchen and then use her mobility device to go out to a main road and sell it on the street. She couldn't do that for 3 months because she lost her mobility device. And it was only after she went to a disability advocate in her community that they were able to get the government to give her a new device. So yeah, is the recovery accessible? And then let's say beyond, in what role are people with a disability playing in disaster management policy? Does the Tamil Nadu Disaster Management Authority consult with people who have a disability about its disaster management protocol? Does it employ people with a disability in the Disaster Management Authority? That's certainly something I asked in Odisha, and the answer was no, that there was no one with a disability at the policy-making level in their Disaster Authority. So yeah, I think we need to find, I think there should be ways to ensure that people with a disability have a voice in making policies that impact them. Well, yeah, so, it's always one of these kind of, these problems, like a lot of newspapers or news platforms won't hire you unless you have a portfolio. But how do you get a portfolio if no one's going to hire you? And, some people say, oh, you write, social media is not, you're writing a bunch of hot takes on X or Instagram is not journalism. I don't know. I don't know if university journalism programs at universities here offer internships to students. I think an internship is the best way for an aspiring journalist to get hands-on experience. They might not be able to write for that outlet, but if they shadow reporters, if they have some field experience, maybe they go out into the field, hopefully they're just not pouring chai or coffee as an intern. I think that's good. I know I interned at CNN my last year at university, and it was generally a good internship, and I don't necessarily think that helped me get my first job. But anyhow, it was a really good experience in working in that environment. So yeah, anyone who's studying journalism, if you know anyone who's studying journalism, really push them to get an internship, and hopefully at a good organization that will let them have kind of hands-on experience.